What's up, everybody? It's Pikel, and today I'm going to explain why Gen.G is going to win Worlds. So, you may be asking yourself, Pikel, have you lost your fucking mind? And the answer is no. I never had a mind to begin with. And I think that's pretty clear, according to the people who have been responding in my comment section, especially about Gen.G. But the thing is, Gen.G tied for first place in the regular season in the LCK, and I don't think people understand how vulnerable Damwon Gaming probably is at this point. Now, I don't think that Gen.G should be the favorites on the betting markets, and some of you watching this video may not know, but that's really what I'm focused on, are the betting markets. Gen.G is by far the best bet to win Worlds, in my opinion, because I think that you're getting them, the last time I checked, around plus 1,700, which means that you have to bet $100 and you'll get back $1,700. That's a pretty nice bet. You can bet less, but that's just the ratio that you're going to have to deal with. And I think when you get further into the possible meta that we go into at Worlds and the different players that Gen.G has, I think it becomes much more clear why they have a realistic chance to win Worlds. The other question you have to ask yourself is, what other teams do you think have a legitimate chance to win Worlds, and how does Gen.G match up with them? So the three other main competitors, I think, at Worlds are FPX, EDG, and Damwon Gaming. So before I talk about those matchups, I want to talk about Gen.G. So Gen.G, in the top lane, you have Rascal. Rascal, probably the most underrated top laner in the LCK. He has a really good Lee Sin, really good Renekton, and has shown that he can play Viego. Now, his record on Viego isn't very good, but in order for a team to justify picking a champion like Viego and putting him into the top lane means that Rascal has shown, I'm assuming, it's most likely that Rascal has shown in scrims that they're able to play this champion at a very high level, and that's not surprising. Rascal has been on teams where they weren't able to carry because the drafts didn't go their way. But now, when you have a player like Rascal on a champion like Lee Sin, which is a flex pick, gives the team flexibility in the draft because you can move it between different lanes, and then you're also trying to give him playmaking ability. You don't just give those tools to random players. There are teams out there that have, in the past, that have had top laners who are just tank players or engage players and not true playmakers that can carry on their own. But I really do think that Rascal is that type of player. The only concern is that if we do go into a hyper carry meta, do we see Rascal defaulting onto tank champions? And the reason why I'm not too afraid of that is because even if we do go into that direction, Rascal is still going to be able to play those champions at a high level. It's just that he'll be asked to have a different role within the team. Next up, we have Clid. Clid plays a lot of Volibear, which honestly is not great. I don't love the not reliance on Volibear, but I don't love how much Volibear is being played by Gen.G. But I don't think that's necessarily going to be the case at Worlds. And even if it is the case at Worlds, again, I hope it's because we're in a hyper carry meta. And I'm going to be talking about that a lot because that's really one of the key factors that are leading me to think that Gen.G is going to be very underrated going into Worlds and has a great chance to win the championship. Because a lot of the times at Worlds, you get teams playing much slower when they're up against competition that they truly respect and are afraid of introducing volatility into the early game. So for a player like Clid, yes, they can play Diana, yes, they can play Xin Zhao, but it's more likely that they'll get Volibear or Trundle if it turns into a tank meta. Although I think Xin Zhao would be really interesting in a hyper carry team composition because you do get peel from his ultimate, you get pretty good early game ganks, and if assuming that it's a hyper carry meta, you'll probably have either a supportive mid laner or an enchanter support that's going to be able to buff up not only the hyper carry but also a champion like Xin Zhao very well. And then just the last thing I would say is going back to the Volibear thing. If it is Volibear, then it has to be a tank meta. It has to be a tank meta. You're probably going to see a tank top laner, tank jungler, and then enchanter support with a hyper carry. So that's one of the ways that I think that they could be extremely successful. And the thing is if Gen.G has multiple champions they can play in the hypercarry position, they can kind of force the other teams to adapt to their playstyle. And I do think that they're good enough to adapt to that playstyle. Next up, BDD. So BDD is easily thought of as one of the three, has been thought of as one of the three best mid laners, probably for the last, one of the three best mid laners in the LCK for probably the last 3 years. I think, plus or minus a season or two. So BDD, Chovy, Faker. That's just generally how people talk about it. And BDD and Chovy have had good battles back and forth. BDD and Faker, I think it's been a little bit more lopsided. And if anybody knows the stats better on that, feel free to leave it in the comments, because that might change my opinion a little bit, but not a lot. I think that BDD, in a meta where they can play control mages or supportive champions, is going to be very good for Gen.G's playstyle going into Worlds. We know he can play Azir. We know he can play Akali. Things like Syndra, Orianna. They play the classic set mid to get all that utility onto their team, which would also go well in a hypercarry team composition. So you have a lot of different champions for BDD that play into a later game team style that's going to slow down the early game. It's going to slow down the mid game. And that is a little scary when you're playing against Chinese teams that are going to force the issue. But I'm not 100% positive that the best Chinese teams right now are going to play that aggressive. Except for FPX. But EDG, not as aggressive, in my mind, in a matchup against Gen.G. Next, I'm going to go to Life, because Life is a decent support, but isn't really like a game-changing support. They're not the type of playmaker that you always have to watch out for. It's really just about keeping Ruler safe. And in that sense, that's probably one of the only ways I could see this all going very badly, is if we start seeing Life on Enchanters and then for some reason they just can't do it. I don't think that's the case, because they're a professional support in Korea, so that really shouldn't be the case. But that does concern me a little bit. Like, the Karma stuff could concern me a little bit too. Like, if we see Karma top, Karma mid, it'll be all about Ruler, all about Clid, pumping out a lot of damage. It'd be a super interesting playstyle. And if we do go into that type of meta, I think that Gen.G is going to be either the first or second best team at that playstyle, because they have one of the two best AD carries at Worlds, and that, of course, is Ruler. So Ruler is an insane mechanical player. They played a clip of Ruler last year, or about a year and a half ago, of Ruler on Ashe, and you have to go find that on YouTube. It was pretty insane. They have like all of the key presses that are going on while they're outplaying an entire enemy team. There are a lot of other teams at Worlds that place a high priority on bot lane champions like Aphelios. Like, you'll see a lot of these teams from the minor regions have perfect records on Aphelios, and a lot of that can be contributed to the talent discrepancies in their own region. So, like, in a place like North America, in a place like Brazil, you have teams that are very good for their region, and then other teams that are extremely bad for their region. In a place like Korea, you have the very good teams that are like Worlds competitors and Worlds contenders, and then you have the not so good teams. But they're not as bad as the teams in like the lower end of the LCS or the lower end of CBLOL or one of the smaller regions. So Ruler's up against much harder competition, and I think that's part of the reason why they're 4-3 on Aphelios and 4-3 on Jinx. They're a very good Kalista player, which is going to make them like more impactful in the early game, but I don't want to see Kalista, because if it is a lot of Kalista, then it just kind of sketches me out, like what kind of meta are we actually in. And some people are saying that we're going to have a lot of assassins at Worlds. I just don't see it. Whenever that becomes like a possibility, some teams figure out tanks that just shut them down, and it's too volatile. So even if it is an assassin meta for most of Worlds, I think by the time you get to the semifinals or the finals, it'll be more like traditional front to back compositions, because it's tough to pick a high volatility champion in a high pressure moment, because when you fail, you fail hard. So that's most of the reasons why I think that Gen.G is probably the best bet to win Worlds. And again, you need to understand the words that I'm saying. I know that some people may say, like, it's the best bet, where it means that it's the most likely thing to happen. That's not how betting works. The best bet is not always the most likely thing to happen. It's the edge that you can get. So the edge would be that Gen.G wins more often than the sportsbook's odds imply. So at 1,700, I think that's wrong. I think that Gen.G should be in the high, like right around 1,000, like maybe plus 800, plus 900. So you're getting almost twice as much money for your bet as you should, which is just kind of insane. Now, if you're the kind of person where you're only going to make one bet at Worlds, maybe Gen.G is not the team for you. Maybe it'll crush your soul. But if you're someone who's going out there and is going to put a little bit of money on a few teams so that you have a couple teams that you can root for, I think Gen.G is a great option. I think that there's just a feeling that I have, which is generally a very like negative thing for me. Like I don't always just make bets based off of feelings, but this is a spot where all of the classic narratives surrounding Worlds and teams slowing down and playing around 80 carries, some of the buffs that we've seen recently to hyper carries, and like the supportive champions that allow hyper carries to be successful, all of those things in my mind are adding up to who has the best 80 carry, and I think that Ruler is probably the best 80 carry at Worlds. Maybe second best. You can make a good argument for one other player, and we'll talk about that in the next video. But thanks for watching, and Gen.G will win Worlds.